Okay, so we have a couple additional attendees that are joining in. Again, thank you very much for joining in. Just again, giving you a little bit of, Q&A, or I should say more like rules for today's session. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A section for your questions. And again, we're going to start off the first half of today's session providing a little bit of details about bookkeeping and QuickBooks Online, and then in the latter half, dive into a little bit more on how to use the QuickBooks Online tool. So the purpose of today's webinar is to introduce you to QuickBooks Online, which is a really good tool for small business owners. We've also partnered with QuickBooks Online to provide significant savings and wholesale billing pricing for individuals that are looking to use QuickBooks Online. And again, I will provide a little bit more details about that. So we can go ahead and start. So a little bit of background on who we are. So the name of our company is CPA4IT, which is a chartered professional accounting firm. We have been serving independent contractors for well over 30 years, and our goal is to help small business owners organize their finances, create wealth, and transform that wealth into a legacy. And in today's session, we're really going to be focusing on that, how to help you as a small business owner organize your finances for the business, because this is the stepping stone to then being able to create wealth within your business, as well as then convert that wealth or transform that wealth into a legacy. So starting to dive right on in. What is QuickBooks Online? Okay, so we do know that many small business owners hate doing their bookkeeping. There are many clients, as well as I think accountants, that don't really enjoy the intricacies of doing bookkeeping. However, this is very important for all small business owners. There are three main things that small business owners need to have done when it comes to their requirements of being self-employed and their requirements with the Canada Revenue Agency. And those would entail doing the bookkeeping for your business, doing the accounting as well as the tax return preparation, as well as doing the record keeping for the business. Most people think the bookkeeping and record keeping are one and the same, but they are quite separate. So the bookkeeping is the actual summary of all of the transactions, your income, as well as your expenses that transpire throughout your tax year. That information is then used in order to be able to do the accounting for your tax return preparation. And the record keeping is really keeping those pesky receipts in case your business is ever audited. Of course, CRA can audit your business up to 7 years. So it is important that you are keeping those receipts. Now, to break it down to you a little bit so you understand the difference between the bookkeeping and the record keeping. Record keeping, for example, might be keeping all of your 12 months of your internet bills in case CRA asked to see those bills, whereas the bookkeeping would be the summary of what your total internet expense is for that particular tax year for the business. So again, it can be done hand in hand. However, when we're looking at the bookkeeping component, in order to be able to do proper bookkeeping for your business, it first starts off by separating out your business as well as your personal transactions. So that is very important. So when you're looking at first starting off your bookkeeping, of course, you do need to have your corporate checking account for your business. And we do advise clients to have a credit card for the business as well. So it is quite common for new business owners. If you try to go and get a corporate credit card, you may not be approved for a corporate credit card because your financial institution may say they need to see a few months worth of transactions to see what type of income your business is bringing in before they approve a corporate credit card. However, what you can do in the interim is that you can use a personal credit card for all of your business transactions. But again, we advise clients to separate those business and those personal transactions. So if you're going to use that credit card, dedicate that credit card solely for business transactions, okay? commingling of your personal and your business expenses on a credit card, it's very difficult for business owners like yourself looking to do the bookkeeping, because essentially now you're doing bookkeeping for both your business as well as for yourself individually, in terms of your personal finances, which is not necessary. And if you're also, importing all of your transactions on a QuickBooks Online, for example, which we'll go into a little bit more detail, or if you're using any other form of bookkeeping, it makes it a little bit more difficult for you when you have to go line by line through that credit card statement to see what is business versus what is personal. But if you are separating out those expenses from the onset, it really will help you in terms of organizing all of your different expenses. Typically, I would say if you are purchasing something and it is business related, you will pull out that credit card and I am going to be using this as a business expense, so I'm using this credit card dedicated for the business. The likelihood of you accidentally having a few personal transactions on that is still small. Okay, but at least if you know that you're using this credit card solely for business purposes, you can go back and know that everything associated to the business transactions are there on that credit card or there on that checking account. So even when we're starting to think of, okay, well, what are the business expenses I can deduct? It is very important from the onset as a small business owner that you familiarize yourself with what are the different expenses I can deduct. Okay, so when we're looking at your expense deductions, I've pulled up this document which goes through all of the different expenses that you can deduct through your business. Knowing what this is from the beginning of your tax year or when you're just starting off your business is important, because we never like to hear from clients that the entire year has gone by and they said, I did not know this was a business expense. I did not track that. I did not deduct that through my business. Now, it's not to say if you did not pay for it on your corporate credit card or again, your bank account for the business that you cannot deduct it. That just means that if you've paid for it personally, you then now need to manually record that transaction under your bookkeeping tool that you've paid for it personally. But if you're already cognizantly aware of all the different deductions that you can write off from the beginning, it will make things a lot easier and smoother for you moving forward. So when we're looking at these expenses, what do they entail? So of course, there are, the two primary expenses I like to call, but for the fact of being self-employed that you would incur, which would be the cost to incorporate your business and the cost in processing your tax return, as well as using any cloud-based bookkeeping tool for your business. So in other words, if you were never incorporated or if you never had a business, you would not have these expenses. But there are also several expenses, which are things that if you did not have a business, you would typically be paying for personally, but paying for with your, after-tax salary if you were an employee, for example, which now can be reallocated from a business expense to a personal expense. So some of those larger expenses would include everything such as your home office. Okay, so your home is always going to be I should say always, but in most situations, your head office for the business. So if there's a room or a den or certain area of the home that you're utilizing for business purposes, it is important that you do calculate the square footage of that area to the ratio of the rest of the home to determine what is the percentage of the home that's being used for business purposes. So now a portion of your housing expenses can be deemed as a business expense. Now, the rent expense in particular is one of those expenses that you will always pay for primarily personally. So for example, we're not looking to see whether it's your rent or your mortgage payments coming out from a corporate bank account. Okay, this still remains as a personal expense. But then we do need to help you calculate what the percentage of your home that's being used for business purposes. And the home expense is one of those that you do need to manually record on your bookkeeping so that the company is reimbursing you for the use of that. But other expenses that you do get to reallocate would include certain things such as telephone expense, which would be anything such as your internet or your cell phone that you're utilizing for business purposes. Now, again, this is another expense that in all situations, these bills would be, whether it's under your personal name or your spouse's name. It does not matter whose name any of your expenses or your accounts are under. As long as it's being used for business purposes, it is a business deductible. So you don't need to worry about, well, now I need to cancel my personal cell phone because now I need to set up a business cell phone account under the business name in order to be able to deduct that expense. That is not the case. It can remain personally, but now you're saying, well, whether or not I'm working from home, I have use of my internet at home because that's where I'm doing my bookkeeping. That's where I'm maybe looking for another contract. Or your phone is what you're using in terms of communicating with your clients. So now these expenses can be 100% reallocated as a business expense. So if these can now be reallocated, what you can now do is say, okay, if 100% of this is a business deductible, you can now have these expenses being paid directly from your corporate bank account, or again, from that designated credit card that you are utilizing for business purposes, okay? So those are two of the larger expenses that you do get to reallocate. But again, there are many more deductions, such as whether or not you have travel, whether you have an automobile that you're utilizing, whether you have any bank charges, books and protocol expenses. So I would again suggest that you do familiarize yourself with the different expenses that you're allowed to deduct from the beginning. So once you know what you can deduct, the next step is, what am I going to use in terms of my bookkeeping? Now, the old school way of doing bookkeeping, that ledger where you would write the date, the vendor, the amount, and what that categorization is, and then manually having to tabulate that. Then, from there, it advanced over to the use of Excel, where individuals, again, you can now type in the date, the vendor, the amount, as well as in the categorization of that expense. And then through different features and formulas, you can summarize what those deductions are. But this is still a very primitive method of doing your bookkeeping, as well as a very manual method, because essentially you would have to look at your corporate bank account and that credit card that you're using for business purposes. And as the transactions show on these statements, you are then manually typing that into an Excel to then be able to provide a summary, which again is very time consuming. And that's where automation comes into play with the use of QuickBooks Online. Okay, so what QuickBooks Online, it is an automated tool that allows you to link your corporate bank account as well as your credit card account to your QuickBooks Online, and it imports all of your transactions as they would show on that credit card statement. So you don't need to be entering all of this information manually. And once the data has been imported from there, all you need to do is categorize the expenses. Okay. The benefits as well of using this tool is that it really does help you in terms of improving your cash flow, reducing your turnaround time frame of doing your bookkeeping, as well as really having that confidence that it is capturing all of your expenses. So thankfully, we are in a time where not many people use cash, which is great. Every accountant likes that. There's a paper trail for everything on a credit card, on a bank account, so which is perfect. So again, if you know that you're putting the majority of those expenses in some form of account, then you are able to capture all of those different deductions. Going back to some of the older primitive methods of doing bookkeeping, because it is something that is very time consuming, most individuals typically would wait till the end of their tax year to start looking at the bookkeeping, to start manually typing everything and manually recording everything, and possibly flipping through all those different receipts that they may have had if they paid for certain things with cash or in a different method. And then what we tend to find that happens is that this becomes a pile of work that clients need to do near their year end, or sometimes even after their year end. And then you are spending a lot of time maybe getting frustrated with having to do so much of the work, maybe even potentially, deciding to omit some of the transactions because it's just too tedious and too time consuming. And then if it's taking you this long, then you start cutting into the situation of now you're possibly missing your CRA filing deadlines because you have not gotten caught up with the bookkeeping in order to be able to submit. Another thing as well, which is, some of the downsides of using these, antiquated tools, is that you wait till the end of the year, and that's when you start to realize, oh, wow, I've spent a lot of money on meals and entertainment, or I didn't realize how high my internet expenses were. So you have no idea of what the finances for your business are throughout the year if you're waiting only towards the end of the year to do your bookkeeping. But by using QuickBooks Online, it's importing all this information from the beginning, and all of your transactions you then get to categorize. So at any time throughout the year, you can go in and look and see, what's my total income? What's my total HST that I have collected that I need to know I'm putting aside so I need to repay to CRA? So it gives you that understanding of where the finances stand in terms of your business. It's also very important that you know where the finances stand for your business when it comes to doing your personal tax planning. Okay. Now, of course, your personal tax planning is normally done around the November-December timeframe because the personal tax year ends of December 31st. So regardless of when your year-end date is for the business, that's when we need to have an idea of how much money you've taken up from the corporation for your personal use and how much of that is actually going to be deemed as income to you, whether it's employment income or whether it's dividend income. So if you're not up to date on your bookkeeping and we ask you, okay, what did you make? And you say, I don't know. What did you take out? I don't know. What are your expenses that you paid for personally the company needs to reimburse you? I don't know. When you don't know these things, it makes it very difficult for us to really be able to provide you proper tax planning if you don't know where the finances stand, and we have no idea of knowing either. So a tool like QuickBooks Online really helps you solve all of these problems. Okay. It is also very important as well, if you are opting to utilize QuickBooks Online, that you really start utilizing this within the first 3 months of your beginning of your tax year. And the reason why is because the importing of your transactions from your credit, from your bank or your financial institution into QuickBooks Online, they're only allowed, or I should say the financial institution only allows QuickBooks Online to import data 3 months prior to when you link your bank account. So again, don't think you're going to come at the end of your tax year and say, okay, well, now I want to use QuickBooks. I'm linking my bank account and assuming it's going to link all of your transactions for the last 12 months. That is not the case. Now, are there some clients who do at the end decide that they want to use QuickBooks Online? Yes. So unfortunately, since you would not be able to import transactions more than the 3 months prior to, the workaround is that we would advise clients log into your finance institution, download your transaction from your bank account as well as your credit card account into a CSV file. And then from there, the transactions can then be imported into QuickBooks, where you would have the entire year's worth of transactions, and then you can do the categorization. So again, although there's a workaround of that, still not something that we advise for clients because it still takes a little bit of manual work associated to getting all that information in. Another reason why it's really good to start off with your QuickBooks Online right away is because the benefits of QuickBooks is not only to import your transaction. Okay. There is certain features within QuickBooks Online in terms of the use of AI, whereby when you start categorizing your transactions throughout the year, it starts to mimic your transactions in terms of how you have categorized that, and then starts to automatically categorize those expenses moving forward. So meaning, if within your first 3 months, you're really diligent in logging onto your QuickBooks Online and doing those categorization, then afterwards, it will start to notice, okay, well, if every time you have allocated Rogers is going to be for your internet, it's going to start doing that auto categorization for you. So at least even if after the first 3 months, you've kind of, eased up on how often you're doing the bookkeeping, it will be kicking in that automation for you behind the scenes. Versus if you just set up the QuickBooks Online, and you do no form of categorization, okay, and it's only importing your transactions, then unfortunately, it's not really learning how you are categorizing to do that automation for you. So the sooner you kind of get onto that, the better. As well, for security purposes, a lot of these financial institutions, they do after, I would say, typically within a 2 to 3 month time frame, they typically disconnect the bank feeds of your financial institution to QuickBooks Online. And the reason why is because your financial institution is really trying to protect your data and wanted to make sure that you are, given that ongoing consent for your information to be provided to QuickBooks Online. So in other words, if you set it up now, it's not to say that, if you never log into your QuickBooks, that for 5 years running, all of your transactions are going to be important. That's not the case. So it is also important that at least every, I would say, 2 to 3 months that you are logging on, just to make sure that your bank feeds are still connected, so that again, your transactions are being imported. If it turns out that maybe you've logged on 6 months later and then you realize that some of your bank feeds were or I should say your bank feeds were broken, and that now you can only go 3 months back in terms of your imported, and there might be a few months of transactions which were never imported, again, then you would need to utilize the CSV file to do that manual import into C to see what transactions were missed from there. Okay. I know someone is asking, is there only one slide for the presentation? Not at all. I'm just going to go through it a little bit more, but just explain a little bit in terms of what the benefits that the QuickBooks Online can really provide for you. So even when we're talking about the, what it really is and what it does for you, it is, again, a more modern method to use for your bookkeeping for the business. Okay. Now, there are many different cloud-based bookkeeping tools that you can utilize. And again, we support clients utilizing any form of bookkeeping tool. However, QuickBooks Online is a tool that we really promote for our clients because there are so many different features and functions that QuickBooks Online can provide for you. And the beautiful thing about QuickBooks Online is that they're always adding new features to the tool. So again, it's not just about tracking your income and tracking your expenses. You can utilize it for certain things such as invoicing your clients, submitting payments for your clients. There is even a tool within QuickBooks Online that allows you to then utilize use of your kilometers for business purposes through your location on your phone. So there are a plethora of benefits that this really does provide for you, okay, outside of the basics income and expense calculation, invoicing, as well as for the reporting. Now, when we're looking at utilizing the bookkeeping tool, one of the first things that we advise for clients is that once you set up your QuickBooks Online, you do need to have a chart of accounts set up for your business. So QuickBooks comes with it's a very blank tool. So just like how we were discussing all the different expenses that you're allowed to deduct, from there, you need to then have that chart of accounts set up within your QuickBooks Online so that you're able to map out what those expenses are, okay, that you are deducting, as well as the chart of accounts for the accounting purposes. So we do provide for our clients a chart of accounts, which you can import into your QuickBooks Online. Some individuals, they do manually create their own chart of accounts. Not something that we advise because, again, if you're unfamiliar with what the different expenses are, you may not be utilizing a proper chart of accounts. So it is important that you are relying on an accounting professional to provide you with the chart of accounts. Okay. So once those chart of accounts have been set up for the business, okay, from there, again, you want to link your bank accounts for the business. Okay. Once you are linking your corporate as well as your personal accounts for the business, my apologies, let me back up a minute. When I say personal accounts, I should specify the account if you're using a credit card, a personal credit card solely for business purposes. Typically, we advise clients, we only really want to see whether it's 1 or 2 corporate accounts that you have, maybe a checking account as maybe a saving account for the business, and maybe if you have 1 or 2 credit cards that you're using, again, solely for business purposes. What happens if you start commingling all of your personal accounts, your personal checking, your personal saving, your personal credit cards, and all of these things under the one tool? Now it's importing everything. QuickBooks Online has no way of deciphering what is business and what is personal. So now you're going to need to be doing that chart of accounts, okay, using that chart of accounts to separate all of the transactions which are personal transactions so that it is being reported separately when you're doing the reports for the business. So there is another question. Do you provide support to link bank accounts and credit card accounts in QuickBooks Online? Yes, we do. So that boils down a little bit into some of the different training that we do provide for QuickBooks Online. So there are many different training tools that you can use to help you with the QuickBooks Online. Okay. Sometimes you might want to log in to, QuickBooks Online training that they also do provide. Most of the webinars or training that they're providing, they're going through everything associated to how to use QuickBooks all in one shot. Okay. Whereas for small business owners like yourself, there might be certain features which you don't necessarily need, or for, let's say, they have features of use of inventory, which you're saying, for my business, I don't need that. That's not something that I require. So we do have a QuickBooks Online training tutorial that we do provide on YouTube. And I will go ahead and provide everyone, actually, I'll do that right now. I will provide everyone in the chat the link to be able to access this specific tool, this specific training session. So this training session, what it does is that it breaks down all of the different training or the different features in QuickBooks Online so that you can determine what is a specific training that you want to do right now. So maybe initially, to start off for your business, you might say, I only want to learn how to be able to, as you said, how to be able to connect your bank account and your credit card. So that takes you to a 3-minute training session where you specifically provide details on how to do this particular task. Maybe from there, you might say, okay, right now I just need to know how am I going to record sales and invoices into my business. So again, you can specifically select which particular feature of QuickBooks Online that you want to learn, and you can learn it at your own pace. Okay, so you don't have to feel I have to sit in a 2-hour full intensive QuickBooks Online training session to help me, when it's maybe 1 or 2 of the different features that you only need training for at that particular time. So again, allowing you better understanding of how to use the tool, but so that you can select one by one at your pace what you want to learn. Okay, so there is another question. Let's see here. Are there any other tools that we can use together with QuickBooks Online to keep track of your expenses and receipts? Yes, there is. So that ties into the use of Receipt Bank, which is for the record keeping for the business. So as I had mentioned, as a self-employed individual, there are 3 main things that you are obligated to do when it comes to your taxation. Or I should say, not necessarily your taxation, but being self-employed, your obligations that the government requires of you. Again, the bookkeeping, which is, again, tracking of the income as well as the expenses. The accounting, so once the bookkeeping is done, you're providing that information to your accountant so that we can see what are your transactions. We can use benchmarking analysis to see if you're over or under expensing in different categories. And then from there, you then have to do your record keeping. So the record keeping is something that you as an individual, you are responsible to do. Okay, you're responsible to keep track of those receipts. Most people like to say, well, you know what, I paid for something on my credit card, so look, that's my receipt or my transaction that shows that I paid for it. However, a credit card statement or a bank statement is not considered a receipt. Okay, because, for example, you may have gone to Amazon and purchased a computer for your business, and it shows up on your credit card statement, Amazon, $2,000. And you might say, there, that's the computer that I bought. But when CRA is looking at it, they don't know you bought a computer. You could have bought anything, right? You could have bought a TV. As you know, you can buy pretty much just about anything on Amazon. So that in itself is not a receipt. You need to keep those physical receipts that are showing the date, the vendor, the amount, what the sales tax was on it, what is that item that you actually paid. So the itemization of these specific expenses. So again, thankfully, we live in a day and time where a lot of things are done online, or a lot of companies, they allow you to, they can email you your receipt. So you're keeping that on for tax purposes. But for the occasional receipts that you may have, okay, that you are, you've maybe paid for it personally, or you paid for it with cash, essentially what you get to do is that you can use a tool such as Receipt Bank, where you can capture a picture of that specific receipt, and you can use that in collaboration with QuickBooks Online, so that you're keeping the information. Now, again, we always tell clients, keep those receipts if you're ever audited. Some clients may say, that's great, I have a shoebox in the basement or a filing folder that I have kept all my receipts. The problem is the new receipts these days are these thermal receipts that they wither away over time, okay? So you may have done a great job of keeping that in that folder, and then 5 years later, it's all blank, okay? But utilizing a tool like Dext Receipt Bank, and you're capturing a picture of that specific receipt, CRA does not have an issue with the legitimacy of scanned documentation. So that really helps you in what we really call audit proofing your books, okay? And then you can also integrate your Dex account with your Receipt Bank account. So then that way it will do the matching of your receipts with your transactions, so that you can go and take a look at your QuickBooks Online and see all of the transactions that you have that have corresponding receipts matched to them. And as well, within Dex, it will also show you that if you have a few receipts there that it's unable to match with your QuickBooks Online, it will tell you, look, these are receipts that don't match, which would mean that you've either paid for them personally or through cash. So then you will know, okay, now I need to be manually recording those transactions under my QuickBooks Online. So I would also like to thank my colleague, Andrew Wall, for joining in. As I did promise you guys, Andrew was joining in for the second half to go over the nitty-gritty of the using QuickBooks Online. Let me just say, I think there's one other question that came in.
Yeah, and I was just going
What
to answer
should be
that
done
for you,
for
but
digital receipts? Save in an
yeah,
online drive. So the beautiful thing about utilizing Dext is that you can, although it's an app, you can take pictures of it. You are also provided with a customized email address. Okay. So what you can do is when you have those, Amazon receipts or whatever the case that comes through, you can actually forward that receipt email to your Dext account with your personalized email that they do provide for you, and then it is capturing the information. So we tend to tell clients, look, if you're going to be utilizing some form of electronic method for your receipts, try not to separate them all over. Try to keep them all in one place so it's all organized, because again, you don't want your auditing and you have some receipts one place, some receipts another place. When you keep them all together, again, it's all about really helping you in terms of organizing your finances. For our clients, we do provide Dext free, complimentary to all our clients. Unfortunately, we can't provide QuickBooks Online complimentary to all clients. We wish we could. We are able to provide good wholesale pricing, where typically the retail pricing of QuickBooks Online, you're looking at about $80. We're able to provide that for you at about $45. So quite a significant amount of savings. Unfortunately, we can't provide that to you complimentary, but the Dex account we can provide to you complimentary. And the reason why is, the reason why we do that, as well as put on these webinars, as well as provide these YouTube tutorials for our clients, we have a vested interest in our clients doing a good job for your bookkeeping. Whether, now it's very important to know whether you want to do it or whether you want us to do it. But at the end of the day, if you want to do it, we want you to do a good job. We don't want to say, go and bring us impeccable books, right? The more organized you are, the better it is for us when we're doing your tax planning, the better it is for us in terms of doing your accounting. The more organized you are with your receipts, the better it is for the audit representation that we're providing complimentary for our clients, so we can fight these audits. So we have a vested interest in you doing a good job, and hence why we're really putting on these sessions for our clients. So now I'm going to take it away to my colleague Andrew. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can
Yeah, thank you,
come on
Rachel.
and open that QuickBooks Online demo and take it away.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you covering the first half of this session for me. And couldn't agree more with you. I love Dext, formerly Receipt Bank. And it is an incredibly powerful tool, not only for the bookkeeping, but also for the audit representation protection, because, um, you know, most receipts are printed on thermal paper, which can and will fade over time. So even if you're really good at keeping those documents, by the time you go back to an audit, which is typically 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, those documents may not be legible anymore. And so we really want to make sure that we're giving you the tools to be able to survive those audits and keep every dollar that you're able to claim as a business owner. Because our mission here at CPA 4IT is to help you organize your finances, create wealth, and transform wealth into a legacy. And if CRA comes knocking and takes a big chunk of that wealth, it's pretty hard to create a legacy when they do that. So we want to help you to build money inside your corporation and be able to create multi-generational wealth with that. But speaking to the organizing your finances section, we did want to give you guys some hands-on tips on QuickBooks Online. So first of all, the one thing I wanted to tell everyone is that there is a sample file. So if you're trying to learn and play around with QuickBooks Online and you don't want to risk damaging your own file, there is a sample file that you can go to, which is what I'm going to be working with today. So if you just search QuickBooks Online sample file Canada, you'll get to this page here, and there's a link. And in fact, what I'm going to do right now is I am going to post into the chat here the test drive URL. So this is the link to the test drive file in case any of you want to play around with QuickBooks Online, which will take you over to, it should actually take you to the dashboard. I've been playing around a little bit in the sample file. And there is a sample company here that comes up, and you can see all these different things that you can do with QuickBooks Online. One of the things I do want to sort of talk about first and foremost is sort of navigation and how you move around QuickBooks Online. It is for the most part intuitive, but the one thing that drives me a little bit nuts about QuickBooks Online is they seem to believe that accountants and business owners don't speak the same language. And so sometimes you'll see a completely different view than what I see. So if you see this navigation here, on the menu, we have dashboard, banking, sales, customer leads, cash flow, expenses, projects, payroll, reports, taxes. But if I go to my menu settings here, and I switch to the business view, in a second, you'll see that all the wording on that navigation changes. So usually we're going to be referring based on the accounting language. So if we're telling you to go somewhere and you're like, I can't see it, there's either one option, which is to switch back to the normal menu, or to sort of try and interpret. So you can see this is the business overview, or sorry, the business view, which gives you business overview, bookkeeping, get paid and pay, customers and leads, payrolls and taxes, apps. I'm going to switch back to the accountant view because this is what we use day in, day out. And in fact, I would encourage everyone to get comfortable with the concept of accounting jargon, because nowhere other than QuickBooks Online do they use the small business jargon that they think helps you to better understand how to navigate. And I would strongly encourage you to get used to the actual accountant terms. Now, one of the other things that's nice about the menu is that you can customize the menu. So if there's things you don't want to see in there that you don't use, you can customize the menu. And so if we go into customize here, it'll give you a list of all the things that are available to have in your menu that you may or may not want to see. So if there's certain functionality that you're never going to use, you can remove that from your dashboard. For example, most of our clients aren't going to use projects or payroll. So we can take those out and save that customization. And then you'll see projects and payroll are going to be removed from the left-hand navigation, just keeping it a little bit sort of tighter. And then you can always add those back in down the road if you want to. Now, the other thing that is tricky about QuickBooks navigation is we're focused right now on the menu as the primary form of navigation, but there is also something called the gear icon. And the gear icon is going to give you access to actually some really important features that you will need to be able to use. And that includes importing data, which includes things like importing your chart of accounts, which we do provide a sample chart of accounts that you can review. It also gives you your audit log if you want to go and have a look at what has actually been transpiring in your file. If we are doing some work and assisting, you can go and see the audit log and everything there. Your budgeting, which some people use, some people don't, and the reconciling feature, which absolutely everybody should be using. So one of the big things that is important is that when you are preparing a set of financial statements, we do double entry accounting, which means everything must balance. There must be a debit for every credit and a credit for every debit. And the reconciliation is a really important part of that, because if there isn't a debit and credit for every single transaction on your bank statement won't balance, which means your balance sheet won't balance, which will create a lot of problems in your file. And this is an often overlooked process that is really easy to do once you've actually become familiar with it. And effectively, what you're doing when you're doing a reconciliation is just making sure that your opening balance plus your transactions equals your closing balance. And the reason that is absolutely critical is in this day and age where we're relying on bank feeds and what is effectively the scraping of banking data from your financial institution, is far from perfect. And with multi-factor authentication, those bank feeds break periodically. And if they break and reconnect, you might end up with either a duplicate transaction from the same day, or worse yet, a gap in information. So maybe it can only go back 3 months, but your bank feed broke 4 months ago. So the bank reconciliation is a really important process to make sure that you have not missed any transaction. And the beautiful thing about reconciliation is that if you do have all the transactions, it really is simple as going in, putting in your opening balance, putting in your closing balance, and QuickBooks will automatically go through and all the transactions, total them up for you, highlight the ones that it thinks are related to that period. And if it all balances to the same thing, you're good, you're done. That's all it is. And now if you don't balance, you do have a bigger issue in trying to locate what transaction is missing, which is why we do recommend that you reconcile monthly, not annually, because you can reconcile for an entire 12-month period if you wish. The reason that we don't recommend that is if you go back to try and find a gap or a duplicate, it's much harder because you're now looking at an entire year instead of just a 1-month period. The other thing that's really important to look at is your account and settings. And the account and settings are the most overlooked part of the process, because by default, I don't know why it's not coming up here. Let's try it again. Come on, accounts and settings. This is the joys of live demos. And I don't know why. We'll give it a second. But the reason it's important to go into your accounts and settings is by default, QuickBooks is going to set your company up with effectively a December year end, which may or may not be your fiscal year end. And so it is really important for all your reporting to be correct, because when we go to export all the relevant reports based on the fiscal year, if the fiscal year is wrong, then we're going to get the wrong reports, and that's going to be a big issue. So finally, this opened up. I don't know why it's so slow. So when you come in here, you got your default company information. Anytime you see a pencil, you can update and modify that. But the big one is going to be under your advanced section. So I don't know why this is buried under advanced. To me, this should be basic information, but they also go with the first month of your fiscal year end. Again, a little curveball that they throw you. So if your year end is July, the first month of your fiscal year end would be August. Instead of asking what your fiscal year end is, they ask you for what is the first month of your fiscal year end. So it's really important to make sure that we come in and set that up. There's a whole bunch of other features. The big one I want to talk to you about is currency. And if you need to run multi-currency, you do need to turn that on. But you can't turn it off once it's been turned on. And multi-currency can potentially create issues for you if you don't need it. Now, it's important to know and understand that you do not need multi-currency to pay for an expense in US dollars. What you need multi-currency for is if you are going to keep an item on your balance sheet that is in a different currency than your home currency, which would be Canadian. So typically the only time our clients are going to need that is if you have a US balanced bank account. So it's a US currency bank account, then you would need multi-currency. Don't turn it on if you don't need it. That's really the only other time that you will need it. Now, those are the big things that you'll need in the gear icon. For most of your day-to-day operational stuff, you will be able to find all that under your primary navigation to the left. But it's important to know that that gear icon is up there, and it does have some shortcuts that you won't find in the primary navigation. Okay, and again, just to make things easy or difficult, they again have a business view and an accountant view. So this is what the business view looks like. If I can pull that up. Joys of live demos. Let's change my main navigation again. And my gear icon comes up. It hasn't changed as much, but it has changed a little bit as far as what features and availability are available in here. So we're going to switch back to accountant view just to make the system churn. And then I want to look into where you guys are probably going to spend the majority of your time, which is going to be either under expenses or under the banking tab. So expenses, if you are connecting Receipt Bank to QuickBooks Online, which is an incredibly powerful combination, what's going to happen is first you will scan your receipts with your mobile phone or send them to the email address, or even use their bank or use their receipt fetch feature. So you can connect to like QuickBooks Online, or sorry, not QuickBooks Online, but like Amazon or any online account that you have. And it will go and fetch invoices from those online tools like Bell or Amazon and pull those into Dext. But those aren't in QBO unless you push them over to QBO from Dext. So the workflow is first send the transactions over to Dext, give them a second for the OCR engine to run through them and pull out all the relevant information. Go into Dext, make sure the information is correct, choose your classification. And we've got a whole nother webinar on Dext where we can show you the power of Dext and how you can select, all transactions for one vendor and classify them very quickly. But then once they're good, you approve them and you push them over to QBO. Those transactions will show up in your expenses. So there'll be a list of transactions here that are coming from QuickBooks Online. Now, some of those transactions might be paid for by cash. Some of them might be paid for by personal credit cards. Some of them might be paid for by your corporate bank account or your corporate credit card. Now, those corporate credit card and debit card transactions will then be used to match the actual transaction on your bank statement. So I'll show you that when we go to the banking statement next, but you should see those transactions that you push from Dext over in here. The big difference is that when you click through, so we've got some check expenses that have been created here, some bills. And if we look at any one of these transactions, when they come up here, which it will eventually, you have memos and attachments. And what you'll actually see under the attachments and memo field will be a link back to the actual image that you can click on that came through Dex. So you'll get all this information auto-populated based on how you've set up your Dex account. And everything will come in here with a full link back to the supporting documentation, which is incredibly powerful. Now, if you are creating your own expense transactions in here, it's important to note that this is absolutely required for any direct or pay transactions that will not show up on your debit card or credit card. However, if the transaction is going to show up on your debit card or credit card, there's a quick and dirty way of adding those expenses into your list of expenses and deductible business expenses, or even on the invoice side, the revenue side, without having to manually enter those transactions in here. So yes, you absolutely can come in here and enter those, but remember the expenses need to be done as a first step, not as a second step in your workflow. And what I mean by that is the second step in your workflow should be going to your banking register and hopefully connecting this to bank feed so that the transactions are coming in and flowing into the bank register automatically. And that's as simple as basically logging into your online bank account. So you click link account and then you basically go through the process of logging into your online bank account. And that'll create a connection that allows QuickBooks to go onto your bank account and scrape everything that's in your bank account. And for depending upon who your bank account is with, they'll be able to go back varying levels of the amount of time that they can go back will vary. You can typically get at least 3 months for every banking institution. Some banking institutions will allow you to go back the whole year, if not even longer, which is incredibly powerful because now those banking transactions don't need to be manually entered. And now, as we talked about earlier, with needing to reconcile your bank as a very critical aspect of the accounting process, that means that every single transaction on your bank statement needs to be entered into QuickBooks Online. And that can be done either by doing a bank feed or by manually adding transactions in here. Now, let's assume that we've got these transactions in here and they've flown in automatically. So one of the things that you can do is you can do what we call cache coding. So here's a bunch of transactions that we've got. And let's assume that we didn't want to manually enter the receipt, or it hadn't come through from Dext for this one line item, but it's coming off your bank. Now, if I click on this, I'm going to get a few more details. It's just really, really slow about that transaction and have the ability to change the categorization on that. Now, this is, like I say, really helpful because you can do these in bulk. You could also create some bank rules. And I don't know why it's not clicking through for me. There we go. Oh, I got impatient and I double clicked. Come on, computer. There we go. So you get some more information in here that you can add to the expense transaction. So it's coming through as a transaction type expense. So remember when I told you earlier, we went to the expense tab. If this expense was here, we could potentially have a match. So we can look in here and we could see if there is an existing match. So we could try and find a match. And here's a list of potential transactions. Don't see any in here that are an actual match for that. So maybe we're going to manually enter this. So instead of finding a match, what we're going to do is just categorize this. And what we need to do is we do need to give it a category because uncategorized expenses isn't probably a great expense category for a hotel. So maybe we'll put this under travel expense, travel expense. So I've now added a category. I can add a customer, but that's not necessarily required. Again, that's going to be more information that might be really helpful. But we do need to select a tax account. And by default, these won't actually be created for you. You do have to create these for you under the taxes section. And this is important whether you're on the quick method or the long method of HST. We do need to decide whether we're breaking out HST on this or not. And for those of you not familiar with the difference between the quick and the long method of HST, on the quick method, you don't need to break out the HST on the individual expenses. The only things that you would track HST when you're on the quick method is your sales and any fixed assets that you have. So if you have like computer hardware or computer supplies that we're going to amortize, you can deduct the input tax credit or the HST on those expenses. But other than that, you can select either exempt or zero rated. You should actually choose zero rated rather than exempt, but they will both get you the same objective, which is to not break out the GST, HST on that expense. Now, if you're on the long method, it is really important that you break out the HST on all your individual expenses. So you would select HST on, and it would break out that category. You can, once you do that, you can decide whether you want the default tax code for that thing to always be HST on. So we could say yes. And now anytime I code anything to travel, the default tax code is going to be HST on. I could then add a class, which most of our clients will not use classes. I'm not going to dive into that. You could add tags. Again, I'm not going to dive into that now. You could add memos, or you could add an attachment, or you can simply hit add. And now this transaction that is here on your bank register will now actually appear on your revenue and expenses and your income statement. So one of the important things to be aware of when it comes to the banking register is all the things you see here will not appear in your financial statements until you've actually added them into QuickBooks. The bank register is for reconciliation processes, right? Or reconciliation purposes. And they will not appear in your revenue and expenses until you've actually gone in and either matched to an existing transaction, added them manually, or created a bank rule to process these. And so, for example, one of the things I want to show you is here, let's say we've got a deposit here. And we probably don't want it to be uncategorized revenue. We're just going to call it services for now. We're going to select a tax account code. We're going to call that HST on sales. And now what we can do is we can either add that. We could even split it if we wanted it into multiple categories using the split. But what do they do with the... Maybe I have to add it first. There used to be a button here to automatically create a bank rule, unless I'm going blind. Let's add that. No. Oh, dude, I am going blind. There was create a rule right there. I don't... Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's try that one more time. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just blind today. So let's do this again. Do the exact same thing. Services. Actually, before I do that, one thing I want to show you is it's already learned from our past behavior. Before that was uncategorized income, but it's going, oh, look, I see that you've categorized this under services, so I think it should go under the category services again. But I can go one step further and I can actually create a rule. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rule. And when you create a rule, you can name this rule. So we'll call this bank deposits. And we can say this is only for money in and only to the checking account, or what I like to do is typically all bank accounts. and we can say the description contains ATM deposit. I'm going to change that just slightly to say deposit. I can now test that rule if I wanted, or I can continue down further and see what other features I can have. So I want that to go in as a deposit. I want the category to be services. I could add a payee if I wanted. I can change the tax code. I can add tags. And one of the other options I have down here is a really important feature. So I can either auto add or not. So I'm not going to auto add right now. So there's certain rules that you'd want to have as auto add, like things like, for example, like things that you know are always going to be that category. Think like Shell, Esso. Those are always going to be fuel, right? Whereas Canadian Tire might be fuel sometimes. It might be office supplies, others. It could be automobile. It could be just about anything at Canadian Tire these days. So that you might want to have a rule that automatically makes a suggestion, but doesn't automatically put it into your books and apply the transaction. So I'm going to show you what happens to our bank account now when we create our bank rule. Is now it comes up and it goes, oh, I recognize there's a rule. And so when you see anything under category or match in green, it means that's QuickBooks artificial intelligence and machine learning trying to help you out. So what it's done is it's recognized that there's a rule that exists that matches this. And if that's correct, I can just simply hit add, or I can even come in here, and if I have multiple transactions, I can simply come in and highlight all those and say, yep, I'm going to accept those transactions. I don't know if I highlighted both, but you can highlight as many transactions. I didn't, but you could highlight as many transactions as you want, and then hit accept, update, or exclude. Now, I don't recommend anyone ever use the exclude feature in QBO, because what that basically is going to do is basically remove it like it's not a transaction that doesn't exist. And you will never be able to balance your bank accounts if you exclude a transaction, because you've basically told QuickBooks to ignore a transaction. You should also only be linking into QuickBooks Online your corporate debit card and corporate credit card. Don't bring in all your personal bank accounts, because first of all, you're going to have a whole bunch of transactions that you're going to need to code unnecessarily. Number two, you're also going to create a balance sheet for every account that you have under your banking register. And what that means is if they're personal bank accounts, they're going to have to be removed by your accountant at the end of the year and then added back. And it's a process that inevitably goes awry and creates problems. So get in the proper business habit of just linking your corporate credit card and corporate bank account into these. And if you have transactions that exist outside of them, use the expenses tab to add those manually. And for those wondering the difference between an expense and a bill, an expense is something that has already happened. A bill is something that you have to pay in the future. And when you're adding a new transaction into expenses, the important thing to note is that there is a payment type. Normally what we set up for you is there's another account that some of you might be familiar with called the Director's Advance account. And I want you to think of the Director's Advance account like an imaginary bank account that keeps track of all the expenses that you've paid for personally, less all the money that you withdraw from your bank account. And at the end of the year, we do some jigging around to determine, based on the money that you've taken out, less the expenses that you've paid for, that's effectively going to become usually your salary or your dividend or potentially a loan, but usually your salary. So you'd select from this drop-down method the Director's Advance account 150, as your payment method type, so that we know those expenses were paid for personally. So I know I've already run over a bit of time today, and there's so much more to QuickBooks Online that we could show you, including the reporting and the mileage tracker, which, hey, if you've got QuickBooks Online, please, please, please go set up your mileage tracker, because automobile expenses is one of the most audited expense accounts, because someone at CRA had let the cat out of the bag to let the CRA know that most entrepreneurs are not tracking their mileage expenses. And so when they come back to audit you and you don't have your mileage expenses, you can rest assured that they're going to deny at least a chunk of your automobile expenses. So save yourself the hassle of having to keep a log of all your individual drives, and set up the mileage tracker and get the app for your phone so that it will track all your trips automatically without you having to think about it. Because the beauty of QuickBooks Online is in its automation and its artificial intelligence and its machine learning. But if you don't set it up properly and take advantage of it, you're going to be left still doing a lot of things manually. So again, I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. I do see there's one question that's come up now. How can I know if the short versus long method is being used? So maybe the ultimate question is you should know whether you should be using the short versus the long method. And for that, you need to log on to your CRA account and go to the GST HST section and go to view and filed elections. And what you're looking for is an election for the quick method. If you do not see an election for the quick method, you are on the long method. By default, you are on the long method of HST. Unfortunately, if you're trying to figure out whether you've already extracted GST, HST on the transactions you've already put into QuickBooks Online, you unfortunately need to look at the transactions that you've processed, and determine whether determine whether you actually broke out the HST or not on those individual transactions. Now, there is a reclassify tool that I am not 100% sure if it's available to small businesses. It's something that we as accountants can do for sure. And why am I not finding it right now? But the reclassify will allow us to basically do a search and figure out what transactions have used what tax method, and then be able to reclassify those to a different tax method if necessary. So it can be fixed. If you've got that problem, I would encourage you to reach out, and like if you've already processed transactions and you didn't break out HST, or you did break out HST and you weren't supposed to, reach out to your accounting team here, and we'll set some time up with Carlos, our resident bookkeeping expert, and that's something he can help you fix relatively easily. And I don't know why I can't seem to find the reclassify tool right now, but it does exist, and I wonder if it's just because it's actually it's only available. Oh no, that's reconcile charter accounts and reconcile. So I think that's actually something that's only available to us as accountants. And I think it looks like that's all the questions. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this session. We do these differently every time we run a QuickBooks Online session. We'd love to hear feedback from you guys on what was helpful or what you'd like to see us do differently in the next section. And of course, one of the other ones we'll be coming back to do for sure for you will be showing you a little bit more about how to integrate Dext with QuickBooks Online, which those two in combination are an incredibly powerful tool. And Rachel, thank you to
You're
you
welcome.
for stepping in and covering the first half of the session. And I apologize to those of you for running a little bit long here.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for logging on. And Andrew, thank you very much for providing that, in depth about the actual use of QBO.
No problem.
Okay.
Okay, have a great day.
Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.